So many people and even some bodies have predicted the extinction of some languages. In Nigeria, for instance, UNESCO in 2006 predicted that Igbo language would go extinct in about 50 years. How true is that? Today we'll be talking about indigenous languages and culture in Nigeria. Do Nigerians see indigenous languages and culture as a milestone to our development as a nation? My name is Angiatin Justina. I'm your host, and this is State of the Culture, brought to you by Izesan Speak Asan. Now, it's always so lovely when we have a full house here. I have my co-host here with me. I'm going to give this one a special, should I say, title, because he for some reason likes that. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Welcome people. It's me, Frederick, your social prefect.
I'm sure by now you know that's how they are, cat and rat. I am Nefisat Ohunene Abdurrahman, your girl.
Yes, and certainly not the least, but the last person I'm introducing is our special guest. He is the Executive Director of the National Institute of Nigerian Languages here. Thank you, Professor Obiajulu Emejulu. See, I took that down because because of the practice. I need him to score me again.
Well, this time around, you didn't hit 100.
I knew it. I knew it.
You got it well the last time, but then something happened and we had to start afresh. So that's fine. That's my name. I'm Professor Obiajulu Emejulu, the Executive Director of the National Institute for Nigerian Languages at Aba, NINLAN for short. It's a center of excellence for the development of Nigerian languages set up by the federal government in 1992, but with a law backing it up in 1993, Decree 117 of 1993. And this was under President General Sani Abacha, with Professor Babs Fafunwa as the Minister of Education. So it's about 30 years old currently.
So we'll come back to talking more about NINLAN, like you said. So first off, let's take it from the top, from the very beginning when it was just nations. No, there was no nation called Nigeria, and it was just communities, or what would you say they were? How did they communicate amongst themselves before the advent of English or Pidgin?
Well, yeah, we had lots of nations, nation states. Some were kingdoms ruled by kings, like the great Benin Kingdom that was known all over the world and had diplomatic relations with some European countries and so on, and trade, international trade, with some empires that spilled over into parts of Nigeria and so on and so forth. The Yoruba kingdoms, many kingdoms, but then the great Yoruba speaking peoples, the Igbo nation with decentralized governments, and so many other groups, all the language groups we have in Nigeria, the Efik, the Ibibio, the Urobo, and so on and so forth. We existed in this space. We interacted a great deal. We didn't have to go and hire some British person to come and interpret for us to speak English.
Between like an Efik person talking to a Yoruba.
Yeah, that is something we have to come back to, and we need to look at it critically to see that we are really not helping ourselves by the overdependence on the English language. There was communication, there was trade, there was marriage, there was all kinds of cultural communication and interaction, and these changes. And the languages also were affected. So the communities that bordered different linguistic groups had to be multilingual, bilingual. So you had communities that were very, very multilingual. They spoke their language, and they spoke the languages of 2, 3 other neighboring communities. Not everybody in that community would be multilingual, but they had sufficient number of multilingual people to do their trade. So if you are not multilingual and you want to venture out, you depend on somebody who is multilingual to interpret for you. And in the community you are going to, you're also likely going to meet somebody from there who is also very good in speaking your own language, who is more bilingual or multilingual. So multilingualism was the norm in Africa, and it wasn't a big deal. People in the borderline communities were very happy to speak their language and speak the languages of other people because it was a necessity for interaction, for trade. And you know that traders in those days were mostly multilingual people. And there were people who ventured out and who dared to encounter other people, and they gained by it. So we interacted, we had communication, and it wasn't a big issue. And that's what we need to do today. With the arrival of colonial Britain, English became the dominant language, and now we feel that we have to pass through English. It has to now be the mediator for all the other languages, and that is not helping us. So we will come back to that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So
So this is something that I think is very interesting, I think, with language in particular. So who would you say the onus is to carry the burden of integrating the study of language, across the entire country? If I was to just answer, on a layman perspective, not your level of expertise, I'll say, yeah, this is the job of the Ministry of Education, because they're responsible for determining the curriculum that goes across nationwide, collecting and collating data on, the forms of education that, can be implemented. They are the ones who finance, how education is implemented across board. So you would naturally, be inclined to say, yes, the onus is on the Ministry of Education to promote the study or, the understanding of Nigerian languages as we have it. So my question to you is, should that responsibility, should we say that they have that responsibility, or are there other dimensions to it as to the responsibility of who, takes up, the study?
Yes and yes. Yes, the Ministry of Education has that responsibility because language is central to education. You educate people in a language or in languages. So basically, you can't do education without language. And so, yes, the National Education Policy, NPE, has always had some provisions on language use, language in education, over the years. And so we expected that by now, those provisions would have guided the development of education and language in education in Nigeria to a very enviable level. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, but that's a different matter. But in addition to the Ministry of Education, you have Ministry of Culture, Communication and Culture. Language is also about communication and it's about our culture. So that ministry also has a lot of interest, a lot of stake in language development and language policies, and so on and so forth. The Ministry of Education has taken the lead in developing the national language policy. As we are talking now, there is a draft national language policy document that was passed, approved by the National Council on Education in Jalingo in August 2021, and is now on the way to the Federal Executive Council through the Federal Minister of Education for approval. We are anxiously waiting for this to become a policy document so that we begin to implement it. A lot of stakeholders were involved in developing it, and it pulls together essentially the language policy statements in the national policy on education, the National Broadcasting Commission, the Nigerian Act, the Nigerian law also has statements about language use in the National Assembly and in different places. So all the places where we have had aspects of language policy domiciled, scattered, like a sheep without a shepherd, they have now been pulled together. And then, experts worked on them to give them a futuristic bent and make them proactive to serve our needs for today, and taking cognizance of our current challenges, including what you referred to in your preliminary statement about the decline of Nigerian languages, the UNESCO forecast that some languages will die off, and so on. So this document is supposed to help us overcome our challenges, make our languages more viable, make them effective instruments for national development.
Okay.
Okay, sir. Talking about NINLAND, the National Institute for Nigerian Languages, as the executive director, I'm not going to lie, I heard this in the process of us trying to document the whole thing. A lot of people do not know about the existence of this institution. Why is that? I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to take it gradually. First off, let's start with why is that? Why is it that people are not aware of the existence of an institution like this in Nigeria?
Well, I guess I am responsible. I am guilty, and I plead guilty. So I'll start from myself. I have been the executive director now for 3 years and 2 months. So within that time frame, I have not made it possible for you to be aware of the Institute's existence until today. But by being here today, I think I have at least made some efforts to make the Institute's existence known to you and to many more people through this medium. That's why I'm here, essentially. I want to say that the Institute has had a checkered history from 1992, when it was announced, through 1993, when a decree was rolled out by the government of General Sani Abacha, Decree 117, that brought the Institute legally into existence. So yes, it's been there. It has had 3 executive directors before me. I'm the 4th executive director. But there was a 7 to 8 year period when the Institute didn't exist, between 2005 and 2013-14, when it was ceded to the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, by a pronouncement of the government, of the same federal government that set it up, until a federal high court in Umuahia delivered a judgment in a case filed by interested parties, sending Nsukka packing and restoring the autonomy of the Institute. So you could say that this kind of background has not helped it to project itself, to do very well. But that is only a small part of it. I also think that the government that set it up gave way to other governments. And it doesn't appear to me that successive governments had the same, until now, had the same passion for the Institute as the government that started it. The minister that midwifed this institute was Professor Babs Fafunwa, a renowned educationist who carried out the 6-year IFE study, primary study, in which Yoruba was used as language of instruction for a control group of primary schools children from primary 1 to 6 for all subjects, including English. And English was used to teach the other group.
Okay, so let's understand it. So just so we're not lost, 2 groups were created.
Yeah,
One were
the
taught,
experimental group.
Okay, in Yoruba completely. They were taught
all subjects.
And then the other was taught in English.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is what we do mostly these days.
I'm interested in the outcome.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's why. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. And of course, the outcome was mind-blowing. The outcome was that the experimental group that was taught using Yoruba far outperformed the control group that was taught in English in all subjects, including the English language.
Oh, wow.
This study has been replicated in different parts of the world, including in the Southeast. We've done it with Igbo with the same result. People have borrowed this result, the outcome of this result, and implemented it in their country to a great success. And of course, Professor Fafunwa became the Minister of Education and moved to avail the country of the benefits of this study. And one of the things they did was to set up the National Institute for Nigerian Languages as a center of excellence for the development of the languages, for the training of teachers, for various levels of education, from primary to tertiary, for the various Nigerian languages, so that we will begin to have teachers that are properly trained, who can use their languages to teach, and so the languages will grow. So like I was saying, it appears to me now that the government that took over after Fafunwa withdrew did not have the same passion, so they did not sustain that initial policy trust. Like I said, the institute had an act, where a decree initially under the military, then it became Act number 50, Laws for the Federation of Nigeria. That act gave it mandate, gave it responsibilities, and those were supposed to help you to actualize the mandates. Unfortunately, that has not been followed with the same passion. So that's also one of the reasons we haven't heard much about Nilland. But under this regime, a few things have changed, and we are beginning to hear more about the Institute, just like you are today hearing about it.
Okay, sir. Yeah. So I know you've made mention of the Institute being responsible to train teachers to be able to teach in Nigerian languages. What other mission is Nilland out for?
Like I said, develop Nigerian languages. And there are many ways to develop Nigerian languages. One of them is to develop orthographies for languages that don't have orthographies. Okay. The tools for writing. The A, B, C, D in Igbo, or the A, B, C, D in our different Nigerian languages. By the way, can I get to the A, B, C, D in your language? What's your language?
Better.
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 Better?
Yes.
In which state?
Obudu.
Oh, yes, I know that. Can I hear your A, B, C, D?
Wow. I actually cannot do the ABCD.
I cannot. I cannot.
Frederick.
It's not even happening, don't worry.
Well, he did that to us on the show. Okay. But it's fine, it proves what we're talking about.
That's it. So it's good to take note of this, because we will get back to it. So we assist in developing orthographies. There is the National Educational Research and Development Council, which is a very important agency of government here in Abuja, that oversees all of these activities also, and actually gives the final approval for orthographies, so no matter who develops them. And so they must go through and verify and then approve for them to be put to use. All right, but So that's a very important assignment. Develop texts, because you can't have literacy without texts. People must have things to read and write. So we also are supposed to help to develop texts, develop communication for the various languages. One of the biggest challenges of our Nigerian languages today is, of course, very limited access to the modern media. Only very few are on the radio.
Or in the communities where...
Yes, the radio, television, and today digital communication. The WhatsApp groups, all the Instagrams, all the Facebooks. Some of them have Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba provisions for them. Yes. And those same provisions can be applied by other languages. But for now, we have very limited access for all these Nigerian languages. And the more this continues to be the case, the more the languages will go into decline. Because language thrives with usage. The more you use language, the more it grows.
Yeah.
The less you use it, the less it grows. And eventually it will suffer atrophy, because if you're not using it, it will die off.
Okay, something else is certification, because you are an institute. Yeah. Do you offer certifications that are, say, globally accepted, or even on a national level?
Well, yes. The Institute's Act empowers it to run degrees, diplomas, and certificate programs. But so far, we are running diplomas, postgraduate diplomas, and certificates programs. We started the National Certificate in Education program 3 years ago. The first batch of graduates will come out this year. So yes, we are running programs. We are doing short training programs for different people. For now, we have 8 languages covered in the Institute. Before my time, we had only 3 languages, and you know the 3, of course.
Yes. So what are the other 5?
So the other 5 that we have been able to bring on board are Tiv, Kanuri, Fulfude, Bibio, and Urobo.
Urobo.
Yes. It's not in any special order of seniority or size or facility, but mostly by accident of having some staff already in the school who spoke those languages. So when it was time to expand, it was easier to get 2 additional staff to complement the existing 1 person than to get 3 new staff for a language entirely. Of course, we tried, also to spread out, ensure we had some of the well-known medium-sized languages and so on. Our goal was to capture the 9 Radio Nigeria, the network languages
around Nigeria.
Yes, that they normally use. But it's not possible. Part of the problem is funding, which we will talk about. So with very limited funds, we cannot get all the Nigerian languages on board. By the way, Nigeria has 520 odd languages. From the estimates made, the ethnologue.
Very important.
Ethnologue is a very important data source for languages all over the world. It's a publication of the Summer Institutes of Linguistics, SIL, and there's a Nigerian office in Jos. So they carry out studies on languages of the world. And so the estimate is that we have 520 languages today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you're using estimates, because anyone, you can try it. Try and look for the amount of languages in Nigeria. You'd mostly see, they use the word over 500 or over 520. I've seen 525. Some are going extinct and some are still Exactly. So now let's talk about the world. You've mentioned it already. Now we've seen that a number of institutions outside Nigeria, outside the continent, are treating African studies. They have Igbo, they have Yoruba. What would you say is the motivation for all these institutions that have incorporated this as a discipline or as a course in their various universities?
Well, globalization. The world is a global village. Even before it was, before it became popular to say the world is a global village, following Marshall McLuhan's 1975 statement, the world had become increasingly globalized with people leaving their countries to explore other countries, discover them in quotes, colonize them, and force them to speak their languages, and so on. And this, sometimes also borrow things from those languages. So people have been moving around. But with, of course, the explosion in digital technology and communication, people are moving. Migration is very, very high, and so on. So the people who once moved out and colonized various people are also keen to know the people. Of course, they were the ones that actually facilitated literacy in many of the indigenous languages, because when they came, whether, especially as missionaries, they needed to talk to people in the language they would understand. And so they had to study the languages. They had to develop orthographies for them and begin to teach people in their languages, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, of course, they made us speak their own languages. Then they also found the need to better understand our languages. And the world, the United Nations, especially UNESCO, sees languages as one of the very, very important treasures of mankind. And they don't joke with languages. That's why it was UNESCO that gave the alarm about languages that were in decline and that were heading to extinction. And actually, since 1952, UNESCO has been making statements and giving warnings about languages that were in decline, and encouraging countries of the world, especially the emergent countries of the world, to do something serious about their languages. UNESCO, as far back as 1958, had encouraged countries to use their languages to educate their children, especially the children, because they had already seen through studies that children did better if they were taught in their mother tongues. And so they have been promoting mother tongue education. By the way, today is 7th September. Tomorrow, 8th September, is the International Literacy Day. And a lot of focus is on indigenous languages, literacy in all languages. So that has been the case. The people feel the need to study these languages. So just like we study English and study French and German, people also now study Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, and so many other languages. Of course, the Chinese are also aggressively expanding their
You mentioned a very...
Yeah, so.
There are a couple of questions, and I think a couple of... To build this. One of the things you did mention was we had already been multilingual. This had been way before the colonial era. So being multilingual arose in like some places out of necessity. I think you tied it very much to trade. And to trade happening, it was arising, trade, marriage, all these things happening, so there was a need to learn, to go beyond, learning your language. And I think...
By the way, you didn't learn your language.
No.
In those days, you grew into your language. But
it's the only thing you heard, really.
Yeah. And it's a natural thing. So everybody spoke it. You had to speak it. You learned it. Learned it informally. You didn't have to go to school to learn it. And for other people's languages, you might have to do some learning, but a lot of it also happened naturally. Maybe as you accompanied your mother across the border to trade, to learn, and you also picked some of these things. Sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's just building up. So the where I'm building up to is something you also highlighted on, which is UNESCO pointing out the importance of language and the importance of language as a symbol of identity of a people. Language is not only something that you speak, it is an embodiment of how a set of people interpret life. Language in itself, it's a living thing. Language grows, like you did say, language evolves over time. It always would fit, the kind of moment that we are in history whatsoever. We can tell that English was very different. Let's use English, because that's what I'm going to use to explain how evolution of language started. We can see English in the Victorian era was very, very different from English in the industrial era. A lot more terms, a different style of English.
Elizabethan era.
Yeah,
Victorian
from
era.
Victoria to, that era, and even, to the modern age that we have now. So how important is language to understanding, or how important is language for the identity of a people?
Well, it's perhaps language is the number one variable in the cultural complex, in the things that make up culture, which include religion, which include food, which include certain customs, marriage, customs, attires, wares, and so on and so forth. So language is the number one element of culture, because that's the first thing you identify, really. That's what takes people, that's what people use to tie all the other elements of culture together. You talk about your cloth in your language, aqua, asho. In your own language, ita, whatever it is. So your head, whatever you talk about, you use language. So that is number one. It comes, and that's why it's so important. Language preserves the residue of knowledge that a society, a group generated over the millennia. There are some things you don't know about anymore except through the residue in your language. That's why languages are very important. That's why UNESCO has been crying aloud about languages. Our languages embody lots of knowledge that our ancestors over the millennia developed and transferred from one generation down to the next until us. And we are supposed to carry this knowledge forward. But in this generation, we have become saboteurs of the universal mission of knowledge transfer in our languages, in our indigenous languages. We are now refusing to transfer knowledge that we inherited in our languages to our children. And that is a big challenge. I have a younger colleague, who is working on gem concept mining of languages. He's trying to develop an app. It's one of the little things we are trying to do. Develop an app that you can apply to a language to elicit critical information, vital information that exists in that culture. Every culture has a lot of important things to contribute to the world, to the society. There are ideas, concepts from some of these are small languages that can solve some of the huge problems of society. But unfortunately, nobody has tapped into them. So yes, language is very, very, very vital. There's no way you can overrate language.
I think you raised something which is super important, or you raised something which is super important, the fact that a lot of languages haven't been documented in certain ways. I think there's also this misconception amongst maybe the current generation that we have, could be Gen Z or whatever it may be, the misconception that language isn't passed down, but it's also a lack of documentation. It's an inavailability of people to go to a certain place and learn a language because a language doesn't have the ABCs, hasn't been put down in that format. So in line with how this can form identity and people keying in, because it's also super important, the more you are cut off from where you're from, you don't identify. It also puts you in a different mindset. Do you think that this has been a major barrier in, let's say, how languages are being passed down, and possibly even like Justina mentioned, a reason why, you know, some of these languages are becoming extinct? They're not being documented enough. And how could we solve that?
Let me believe I understood exactly what you said. That living in Abuja, for instance, you are from, where were you from?
I'm from Delta State.
You're from Delta, and she's from Cross River, and she's from Ibira, Kogi, and I am from Anambra, and he's from Kano, and so on, and we're all here and speaking English and interacting, and that in a certain way, it has been partly responsible for our not speaking our languages.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
My question was, do you feel the lack of proper documentation of languages, the fact that languages haven't been put down in formats where you could learn?
No, definitely. That's one of the things with our indigenous languages. That's one of the weapons of colonization. That's one of the things that actually exacerbated what do you call it now? When you talk about subjugating other people and looking down on them, racial profiling, and so on. When somebody begins to look at you and say, "Oh, you are inferior," or "your language is inferior," part of the thing goes back to documentation. You would notice that the English language, the European languages, Chinese, the Arabic language, they all had a long history of documentation. And they all have extant documents that are 1,000 years old,
especially the Chinese,
500 years old and more, so that they still can go back to them and extract information. Africa has a lot, of course. With Egypt, where people today are still able to now extract information and read about the lives of pharaohs and the people of their time 2,000, 3,000 years ago, because they were documented in the hieroglyphics. And so with technology today, people can read them. So if only we had a lot of documentation in our languages, even if people forgot about them and couldn't decode them over years, with time, with knowledge explosion, people eventually are able to decode these things. That is what is happening. So yes, because our languages were largely not documented, because they were mostly oral, by oral transmission, once anything happens to interfere with that transmission process, they begin to suffer a lot. But if they were documented, it's easy to fall back on something. And so even after we have become literate societies with written languages and documents, we have not really acquired that writing culture, reading and writing culture a lot. I don't want to remember that offensive quote that if you want to hide something from a Nigerian or somebody, you hide it inside a book, just to show that we don't read and write. So that's a big challenge. Of course, you are from Cross River. You know, between the northern Igbo and Cross River, you had the Nsibidi, which was a writing culture and form that existed. But like so many of the powerful knowledge that came out of Africa and skills that were even documented, the transfer process got abridged somewhere along the line. Most of them remained in cult circles, and only people who were only initiates of the cults were able to benefit from the knowledge. And so once the cults became less popular and only few people were involved, the knowledge that were encapsulated in those CBD things became irrelevant to the society. So that's part of the problem. Whereas most other cultures had their writing systems, they theologize them. They removed theology from them. They removed culture, religious and cult practices from them. They brought them into the open. And so anybody, non-initiates, can learn to read and write. And then they started using them as means for communication, trade, for everybody. And that helped a lot. So they have this course. So once a language group with documents that they can keep records, and once they encounter a language group that doesn't have those records, it is easy for that other language group to overwhelm the one that is not documented. So I think that's the point you made is clear. That's one of our biggest problems.
Okay.
Yeah, and even to support us in a way, I believe I read a text where even without communication, we had non-verbal forms of communication. For instance, using the talking drum. Some people were forced out of these type of communications when colonialists realized that we were communicating, let's say, over long distances.
Especially with the slaves.
Exactly, with talking drums. People were basically banned from doing
the Haitian Revolution centered a lot on the use of drums and non-verbal communication skills. They still exist today. I think at this point we will now have to come back to ourselves. What happened to us? Colonialism ended in the 60s.
Physical form.
It ended for some Asian countries also in the 50s and 60s, and they took hold of their fate and they reinvented themselves. They brushed up their languages from where they were dumped by the colonialists and repositioned them and started using them. And today their languages are supreme. They're using their languages for education, for communication, and so on. And then they can treat the European languages as foreign languages. So why didn't we do that? That's our problem. So we have answers to give to generations yet unborn about why we failed to do that after independence. That's when we should have rehabilitated our languages and repositioned them. We failed to do that. Let me just quickly make reference to Bolivia because it's an interesting case study of a society that can rehabilitate its languages after years, hundreds of years of subjugation. Bolivia in Central America was colonized by the Spanish very soon after the exploration of Columbus. The Spanish people settled there, dominated the various ethnic Indian communities, and imposed Spanish, and everything became Spanish. And with even independence, the Spanish settlers became the dominant group, even if they were not in the majority, and Spanish became the dominant language, the language of education, language of trade, language of everything, and so on. But here comes Eva Morales, some 17, 18 years ago, the first Indian nationalist president of the country. And what did he do? He said, hey, wait a minute. All the languages of the country are official languages. 35 or 36 of them, official languages. beckoned on friendly countries, Cuba and so on, brought linguists. They quickly embarked on massive orthography development, text development, literacy development in all the languages. And he changed the name of the country to the pluralistic multilingual nation of Bolivia, something to that effect.
Ties into the next thing we want to say.
So that stays to your small bete in Bolivia. Hey man, I'm part of this country. I am an equal stakeholder in this country. This country is me and I'm part of this country. So it's no longer a Spanish country, Bolivia. The same for your Ibira, the same for so everybody. So within 15 years, illiteracy level dropped from about 20-something percent to 3%. Wow. Because everybody was speaking and reading and writing in languages. And UNESCO declared Bolivia illiteracy free. If you have less than 5% illiteracy, then you are assumed to be free of illiteracy. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing documentation can do. And that's what we failed to do at independence. That's what we have failed to do since then for the vast majority of the languages in Nigeria. That is what we need to do today. Yeah. That is what Nilan was set up to do. And that is what it hasn't quite done so well for a number of reasons. I've mentioned some of them already. And that is what I'm hoping to do more of before I finish my tenure in 2 years' time or thereabout.
So having talked about all these things, it partly feels like you were already answering the question I'm going to ask you, but I still feel there are some things untouched and I'm going to ask.
Right ahead,
so you've talked about how Bolivia was able to tackle the issue of multilingualism in their country. Do you think, as it is right now, Nigeria has one of the largest languages in the world, over 520 languages? Do you think Nigeria can and should focus on multilingualism?
It is inevitable. It is very, very critical for us to do that. Let me quickly take you to the United States of America for illustration. Again, Europeans settled in the United States of America, the space known as United States of America. They encountered hundreds of Indian nation states. They fought them with their superior armaments, decimated them, took over the entire place, and confined the remnants in reservations, the Indian reservations. And in these reservations, people had very poor living conditions, poor education, and of course, the languages, died off. 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 200 years. And these people became Americans or members of various Indian communities, but they didn't speak their languages. Their cultures were also, disappearing. And from the 50s down, young people in these communities showed lots of traits of maladjustment. They became drug addicts, social misfits, and so on and so forth. It was rampant. And the people in America started asking questions. What's wrong? Is it in their star, or is it in their blood or something? What can we do? And they carried out studies and found out that it's a very simple matter. They've lost their sense of worth. They've lost their languages,
sense of identity,
and their cultures. Yeah. So who am I? They don't exist. They are just there. So what has happened? States and the central government, in some instances, have put money, huge sums of money, reviving dead Indian languages and reacculturating the people to their languages. And the result is amazing. It's amazing. Young people now, they speak their language. They now have that sense of identity, sense of, belonging to an organized system, sense of pride in their heritage. So that's what language does to a people. And that's what can be done. So Nigeria does not have more languages than India. We don't have more than, I think we are number 3, really. It is not about the number. It's about the will. Okay, let us vote. Those who want their languages to be dropped so that we have fewer numbers to deal with in Nigeria, please indicate.
Absolutely nobody.
Well, it's about your right, fundamental human right. You have the right to use that God-given language, that language that your forefathers developed, used, and achieved so much with. And they handed it over to you. You have a right and a responsibility to keep that language alive and use it. And it does not cost anything. If only people had enough awareness and enough passion and understanding of their history and commitment to their language, that we wouldn't be talking about this. We wouldn't need to spend any special money to keep our languages going and growing, especially with digital technology today. It's far easier today than before. So the point is, nobody, I'm sure, we have all said here, nobody wants to drop their own. You don't want your own to be the sacrificial lamb. And there's no reason why we can't develop all the languages. The 3 major languages are there. Some of them have, the list of them has a minimum of 5 states where they are predominant. They still have 3, 4 other states with substantial number of speakers. Some have more than that. Then let's take the medium-sized languages. Some of them have speakers in 2, 3 states. Some 1 state. Yeah. And you're talking about still millions of people at this level. Yes, absolutely. Some of the European countries have far less number of speakers, original indigenous speakers, than Ibira, than Native, and so on.
So it's just a large number of people being conquered by a small language.
Let's not go there.
Let's not use that.
Let's not go there.
Okay.
It's another whole matter to discuss. But the point is that if 3 million people, 10 million people in a country in Europe are speaking their languages, why can 20 million, 30 million people not speak? Why can a state with 3 languages not develop those languages? Why can a local government area that has a language spoken in that language not develop it? So we can very easily develop all the languages. It just needs that political will and that cultural awareness. That in your preamble, you haven't come to that. You made a very important statement about whether we have enough consciousness or enough commitment to
For our languages,
yeah,
how we feel it's an instrument
for development.
Yes.
That is a critical question, but we have not addressed. Yes, I think that is really the real crunch, the real naughty matter is that we don't have enough consciousness as a nation.
So talking about that, let's start off first from the very beginning. Okay. How to incorporate languages on a national level. So there was this conference that was held in Lagos, I believe, a national curriculum conference in about the 90s, where there was this policy where every child has to learn the language of the indigenous people within the community where the child is based. And also, that's when Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa, were
inculcated
into the curriculum. So would you say that that is effective enough to teach people about languages? Because even before, prior to the show, and at different times, I've asked people that grew up in different states. I asked someone that grew up in Benue, okay, what were you taught the major language there in your school? And he was like, yes, they taught TIF in school. You had to take TIF compulsorily and then pick one of the three major languages. And then same with someone that grew up in Cross River. So would you say that is enough? Would you say that that is enough to establish or to incorporate it on a national level when it comes to languages?
It was done at the national level. And like you observed, it held sway for a period of time. I think that was actually the time of Fafunwa. And it worked. It started working. But then governments changed and things changed. People lost interest. People stopped enforcing these things. The language provisions of the National Policy on Education I talked about, that's exactly what it said initially, that children should, as much as possible, be taught in the language of the immediate community. And then they should learn one of these other languages, and so on. And schools were trying to observe that. From that situation now to the situation where we are, when all the private schools that have taken over in this country don't teach any Nigerian language, they just teach English, and they use English as medium of instruction, and from preschool to primary 6. So it's disastrous for Nigerian languages. So we had the policy, and that document is still there. Even though it was watered down a little bit, it's still there. It still says children should be taught in the language of the, yes, even though it's no longer emphasizing learning one of the other three. Okay. But it is there, the concept is there. So that is our problem, that we had policy guidelines that we are working, and then we abandoned the guidelines. So today, we have developed a draft national language policy. One of the things we kept going back to in the process of developing that document is implementation, enforcement. Because if we had implemented rigidly what was in the language provisions of NPE, Nigeria would be far, far, far ahead of where it is now linguistically in terms of languages. Well, we have gone so far behind from that point, to the point now where in the urban centers of many communities, the southeast, even in some places in the southwest, even some places in different parts of this country, you have children who are, for instance, of Igbo parentage, born in Onitsha, Oka, Enugu, Aba, Owerri, in Igbo, predominantly Igbo towns, mother, father, Igbo. And Emeka, come. Emeka, bien. Emeka, kedu? I'm fine. Emeka, kedu hula akwụkwọ gị? And the mother runs to his rescue. Oh no, Emeka Junior does not speak Igbo. And so on and so forth. So we have that situation in which children today don't speak their mother tongues, even though their parents are speakers, native speakers of those languages. And of course, the schools are not teaching them the languages. They don't give them that opportunity. So it's a very complex problem. Not to talk of where you have interracial marriages, intercultural marriages. But even at that, it's all about commitment, because come, let me show you some beautiful examples of intercultural marriages in Nigeria where the children are multilingual. Beautiful.
It's supposed to be a plus, but
it's supposed to be
a
minus.
Because nobody wants to
teach. So there is a big problem in the system which we will address. It's good to talk about it. I thought you started asking a question about whose responsibility it was, whether government or who. I gave an interview and I rated for me the scale of blame for the decline in Nigerian languages. I said, number one, parents. Because
Primary
you
source
gave
of,
birth to this child. You did not starve this child of breast milk because you wanted that child to survive. So you gave breast milk dutifully and, sufficiently. In fact, sometimes you did, what do you call it now?
You mixed it together.
No. You did a, what do you call it?
Is
when
it
you
mother? No.
when you give only breast
Only
milk.
breast, no water.
Exclusive. Thank you very much. I'm now OT in this matter. But my wife did exclusive. So that's because you have learned that breast milk is ideal for this child. So you save time, give breast, you eat well and breastfeed the child. You clothed the child, gave enough warmth. When the child showed signs of illness, you gave medication, you took him to the doctor, and so on and so forth. You gave the child everything it needed to thrive, except your language.
Your identity.
Which is one of the most important things the child needed. So parents are to blame because you brought this child into the world. You have primary responsibility over the child's future. You must lay the foundation for that child to grow, to thrive. And language is number one. And it does not cost you anything. That is the most annoying aspect of the whole thing. In your home, it does not cost you anything. You don't have to set up any special school. You don't have to invite a lesson teacher. You just speak that language. From the womb, of course, studies have shown that children in the womb hear, they listen. People play music to them. Start talking to your child in your language. And all the lullabies, all the beautiful things, all the poems in your language. Speak to the child. Convince yourself from the moment that child is conceived that my child is an Ibera child and will speak Ibera. And you start saying all the beautiful Ibera words and sentences to that child. The same thing for better and for any other language, for Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, and so on. So, and the child is born. The first word when you carry out your baby should be in your mother tongue. That's why why is it called mother tongue? Not father tongue. It's mother tongue because the child comes from the mother, fruit of the womb. And like we said, you must have been praying for this child to be safely born. You must be singing to God, praying to God.
Yes.
Those things should have been going on in your language. And that once the child is born, in your language, you welcome him or her into the world and sing a beautiful lullabies. You thank God, you ululate. And on a day-to-day basis, you talk to the child in the language. The child speaks the language. Nigerians in the United States of America, in England, elsewhere in the world are doing it.
Yes.
Nigerians who know their onions, who are committed, are doing it.
Yes.
I have a case of an in-law who brought his children back to Nigeria a couple of years ago so that they could build on their Igbo language. And the brother that they sent the child to, their children were not speaking Igbo. The children from America were teaching the ones born in Nigeria in an Igbo town, teaching them Igbo.
That's a slap.
That is the ludicrous situation in which we exist today. So parents, number one. Then after parents, I say government. I say government because, as you have seen, government has every kind of department or ministry for our lives. They have a ministry
for everything.
For having the child in the first place. Yes. But at a point, they had national population. You had to limited us to 4 children. So they also told us how many children to have. They have ministry for education. They have for culture, and they have for everything. So, and government has such enormous powers, as shown in the language provision in the national policy in education, that the government can regulate things and enforce them. One of the things destroying education in Nigeria today is the lack of enforcement, lack of quality control. Because people who are old enough remember that back in the days, inspectors of education were highly revered, respected, and feared because they actually went around schools and dutifully monitored and inspected what was going on and ensured that the right things were done. We are lacking that today. That's affecting so many things. So those provisions, as far as the concerned language, were not enforced anymore. So government is number 2, because government can make the laws and enforce the laws, and a lot will change. The private schools that exist in this country are a terrible setback on our indigenous languages, because the owners have convinced themselves that English first, that and English only.
I
In
mean,
a world,
no vernacular and the whole punishment.
yeah,
So
no, and in a world in which the British, the American governments and their agencies are now promoting multilingual education in their countries, and in Nigeria, in Africa, they are begging us to please use our languages, because they have also been convinced that English only is counterproductive. So the British Council has organized roundtables here in Abuja, bringing experts to talk about the language of education, to encourage multilingual education. USAID, the American government-owned agency, has sponsored lots of intervention projects in Bauchi, Sokoto, and in the country generally, to help us develop multilingual literacy based on our mother tongues. They helped to develop Mokaranta, and they are using it effectively. It's working like magic, because that is exactly what Papua found out in his 6-year IFE study in the early 70s. At the end of that project, we pleaded with them. They developed Kanyegwa for Igbo and Jeka Kawe for Yoruba. They have given the soft copies to state governments in the southeast and southwest to multiply and give to the children and use to teach the children with teachers' handbooks. I'm not aware that any state in the southeast or southwest has multiplied those things. So government, number 2, because of the power of government. Then I said number 3, churches.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Churches, again, because we are religious people, in quotes, we are religiously committed, and we want to be seen to be close to God, and we love God, and that's our nature. That's why people took advantage of us anyway, by the way. So the churches are very powerful in our lives. We respect our ministers, our pastors, our imams. Yes. So what they tell us, we tend to obey, we tend to do. So if they have been focusing on our languages and promoting our languages, we would have also, to a large extent, complied, because we respect them so much. But today, you know the churches. In the 80s, 70s, a lot of them would speak in the languages and then they would translate. But today, everybody wants to be Americana. You know?
I think
the more, English they speak, the more
respected.
Yeah.
The more respected
So,
they are.
so that is what is going on. So I blame the churches.
I think even sometimes, so sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
I'm a Catholic, so the only time, even though there are some people who are, passionate about their language and speak their languages, the only time you might get to hear your language is during Pentecost, which is, if you don't know, a celebration or or when many languages were spoken.
Yes.
Exactly. So that's the only
they'll
time.
say the prayer of the faithful.
Yes,
in many languages.
And that's it. That's all you're getting when it comes to languages. And so I understand. So do we still have any other person on that list of?
Oh, no, of course, the
blame?
schools. Now, outside, because the government will take care of public schools, government schools, government policy. Even government policy should cover private schools.
Yeah, exactly.
All right? But now that we have accepted that government policy has failed, we can also bring in the schools, especially private schools. If the proprietors of the schools themselves were convinced about the primacy of the mother tongue, indigenous languages, they had all it took to promote those and make them work. And but unfortunately, they have been sold to the false idea that English, catch them young in English, is the better thing to do. And so they deny the children the life-giving energy of indigenous languages, mother tongue. And I will raise a poser at this point before you take over.
Okay.
For these hundreds of thousands, maybe now millions of children in the urban areas, even in some semi-urban or semi-rural areas, who speak only English, what is their mother tongue? English. And when we say English, again, you know that this, in many cases, the English is not English. Maybe it's pidgin.
Yes.
Maybe it's broken. And that's what they speak. And they can't speak their indigenous languages. So now, if we start implementing a mother tongue-based education policy, where do we class these children? Because the idea behind mother tongue early basic education is that this is the language they are used to from their mother's hearth, from their family hearth. They were hearing these languages. They were used for folk tales, for lullabies, and it's so natural to them. So once you come and you present new ideas, scientific ideas, whatever, in those same languages, it's not rocket science. They simply just get the ideas. The language is there already. But when they have to struggle with learning a language, learning the language, many of the people that were dismissed as Isiokbo or Olodo in school were simply struggling with the language. Some of them were geniuses, but they were dismissed because they couldn't grapple with the language. So that's a problem. So, but my answer to that is that those are the people we are going to treat now, like the Americans are treating the Indians. We have to now inculturate them into our languages before we now proceed. Otherwise, we still go ahead with multilingual education. They already have English. We now give them Igbo, Yoruba, Bete, Ibera, Tiv, or whatever as second language. So that's so at least before they finish from primary school, they will have acquired sufficient knowledge and skill in those languages. But for that to happen, the parents must sit up, the community must sit up, the churches must sit up, and so on.
Yeah, which is great, and it's like a ripple effect, because imagine if there was a policy that was implemented and mandatory saying, oh, this is how you're going to learn when you get to school. You're going to be taught in these languages. Of course, the parents would teach them the languages, because once you go to school, you will be struggling.
Precisely.
If you don't understand the indigenous language. So if something like that is effected, that means definitely from that base level, all the children would start being taught in their indigenous.
The motivation will be there.
Yeah, the motivation will be there. Because sometimes when some people, excel in English a little bit at that early stages, because they've already heard English at home. So when you get to school, they teach them how to write and all those things. So I don't understand what you're talking about. So
That is just a final thing, really, which I think should not be taken out of context, is always necessity. The necessity to learn. And we must merge ideology with a sense of how realistic it is to put it down. One of the major things a lot of people may argue is when it comes to language, what really is the need for it, especially when there is maybe the presence of English, right? And that's also something that needs to be drummed in for people to understand, okay, look, there is a need for it just for you to preserve culture and for you to have a sense of belonging. And you know what? Also moving into things that are economical. One thing we can definitely say is there's been a rise in the need to learn Mandarin. Why? Because
China has become an economic power.
So that's it's not just Mandarin, even Hindu as well. There was an increase. The more there was an export from places like India, there was a huge need. The reason why a lot of people learn English as well is also because it is a tool economically to use it, to make money.
Yeah, beautiful. Those are genuine.
No, I'm coming to a question.
All right. Okay.
The question is, does language, and having a sense, a grasp of it, does it eventually, lead to economic excellence in a way? Is there a link between understanding, your language, having a good, grasp of it, and then how your country can develop economically?
The nations of the world that have industrialized, look at them closely. Hardly do you see any that industrialized on the wings of a foreign language. The ones we know, the Asian tigers are the more recent, They industrialized on the wings of their own languages. Because by then you show a certain mastery of language that you can use it to do anything, practically anything. It gives you a facility with knowledge that a foreign language does not give you, because you still, no matter how much you want to disbelieve that, you still have some limitations. When we talk about native intelligence, what do we mean really? Native intelligence can be anchored to the mother tongue, the inherited DNA of intelligence, and a lot of that is carried, in the bloodstream of our languages. And if you lose them, yes, fine, you are brilliant. You are shocking everybody. You make A's, English. Who knows if you were actually taught in your mother tongue, you would really have given Nigeria the first Nobel Prize winner in physics or chemistry, because that brilliance we are seeing with English could have been 4 or 5 times what it is if you were brought up in your mother tongue. So we must. I want to say that we are preaching that if you teach people science, teach them math in their mother tongues, those who know their mother tongue and are speaking them from birth, and you give them this new knowledge in their mother tongues, they will shock the world. So industrially, economically, we will do better. And then if it's about communication, Americans learn 3 languages. They learn French, Spanish, for, also for commercial, but also for recreational and social purposes. So they travel around, and today, apps are also coming up that make it easy for people to communicate and interact. But if our languages die, then the apps will be of no relevance to them. So I have heard parents say, of what use, is Igbo to my child. It hurts to the marrow when you hear adults say that, and by way of explaining their starving their children of the indigenous language. Of course, it's marks of laziness in the first place, because it doesn't cost you anything to deny that child knowledge. The common statement we all know, no knowledge is a waste, is still there. Yeah. So if your child speaks your language very well, and it doesn't stop him from speaking English very well, and even acquiring French and Spanish on top of it, what have you lost? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But what have you gained? And what have you gained? A whole lot. We talked about the Indian children and what happened to them. It's happening to Nigerians today in America. A lot of the people born there or who went there very young and lost the languages have become, when you go close to them, they behave like people. You ask, did they, in Igbo, did they drink their mother's breast milk? Because we believe that, in drinking the breast milk, you get the DNA of good sense and good behavior. And what people don't know is that also, traditionally, as the mother is breastfeeding the child, she's singing lullabies in the native language. Even in Abuja here, I encounter both families, and that's why I go to immediately. I go with the children in Igbo, I start speaking Igbo, and it's always a problem. But I try to encourage the parents. I try to challenge them. And I've seen people who swear that they will make amends, that they will do something to change the situation. But certainly, this is something we are all capable of doing something about. We have a lot to gain in giving our children this. The last but one Odenibo lecturer, Odenibo is Nkuzi Odenibo is a lecture given annually in Igbo language in Owerri. It was started by Archbishop Anthony Obinna, the recently retired Archbishop of Owerri. And the lecturer for 2021 was Archbishop Fortunatus Nwachukwu, the papal nuncio then to the Caribbean. But I think he was just moved to Switzerland, the papal nuncio to United Nations in Switzerland. He was amazing in his lecture, in his command of Igbo and so on. But here is a polyglot who speaks Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, and what have you.
That's a whole lot.
And
He can communicate
yeah,
basically in all these places.
effectively.
Anywhere.
There are lots of people. As an ambassador, you've had to move to these places, you've had to learn them and so on. As priests in training, they have acquired Italian and the Latinate languages, French, Spanish, Portuguese are so close that with little effort, you really can master them. So why do you consciously deny your child of a resource that is there for free, that is God-given, that he can acquire without extra lessons, extra efforts? Only for him later in life maybe to start learning some things. In the US now, lots of Nigerians are spending money and time making sure that their children acquire Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. They do summer schools, for Yoruba, for Igbo, and so on, because they've also come to realize that something is missing in the lives of their children. It doesn't matter if you don't have to come back to Nigeria. In actual fact, people outside respect you a lot for who you are, for what you can bring to the table. Excuse me.
Some people are more fascinated about who you are than you are.
Let me tell you something.
Outside.
As an academic,
Yes.
I was the president of the Reading Association of Nigeria for 4 years. I've gone to international conferences. One of the highlights of my career, as far as I'm concerned, after some years of going to the US, I was in the US in 2008 for a conference. And after that, I visited a colleague who was doing his PhD at the Tennessee State University in Cookeville. And there was a Nigerian deputy president, in charge of research. And he happily welcomed me and introduced me to some lecturers who were into some projects and research. One of them was Shannon Collins, somebody who just got a grant to organize a summer writing course that was popular in the US then. Teachers would come together during summer and train themselves, improve their skills, writing skills, so that they can also improve what they teach to the children. So I got involved in this group of about 21 elementary school teachers with about 4 of us as university professors. And so one of the things that happened was you had to take the minutes of a day's activity, all kinds of activities.
Yes.
And then the next day, after the morning reflection, you would read the minutes. And you are required to present it in a creative format of your choice. I was number 3. The man did the first person did his own. He used pop music. I think it was Garth Brooks, something like that. He played the music, put on the music, and started rapping the minutes of the day. And we are dancing. Boy, it was mind-blowing. It was exciting. The other person did recipe. The whole minutes turned into, you wash this first, you steam this for 5 minutes, you do that, you do that. That's how the whole minutes were presented. Very exciting. In the night after the first day, I couldn't sleep. I said, I don't have these facilities these people have. I don't have their skills. What am I going to do to impress these people? I struggled with that. And the second night, a day before, suddenly, I got up. I said, my friend, who are you? Where are you from? What are you talking about? You don't have to compete with them. So I just said, Chabi, war. An evening of, so I related the entire minutes of the day as a folk tale. I became the tortoise that traveled to Tennessee and met a marine tortoise there, and they became friends. And the tortoise was hosting a 2-week title-taking scripting ritual. And every person was one character, one animal character or the other. Before I started, I said in Nigeria, one of the things we use to educate children is stories. We tell stories, folk tales. And when we take folk tales, one of the things we do, we have attention getters, things that we use to draw the attention of the listeners, and intermittently you use them. I say one of such is Chabi, war. So when I say Chabi, you will all say war. I said Chabi, the place broke out. Whoa! And I said, no, not whoa, it's war. For some strange reason, they couldn't get war. Even though, so they were saying war, but I said, it doesn't matter really. But it was magic. They enjoyed the story. They enjoyed the presentation. And after that, the leader said, look, you have to come back. And so we wrote a grant together. The university had center stage laureate that brings musicians, creative people to the university for presentations. And that gave me a grant of about $10,000 to take my wife and myself to the US to make a presentation. I should have brought my flute. It's in that bag. I bought all kinds of little things, oja, echaka, agwo, all kinds of things, ogene, akekwe, and all that. And I said, my wife, bring some extra wrappers and so on. We traveled to Tennessee. We got there. My friend had left, but another student from Futo then was doing her master's and PhD, so I called her. She called the African students together, about half of them Nigerian. I said, look, I have this presentation in a week's time, in 3 days' time, and I need your help. I said, okay, so what? I said, fine. I'm going to be presenting things, and I'll be telling some stories. So I want you to be able to sing. So you be the orchestra. My wife and I, we impromptu, we didn't practice anything. Luckily, my wife had some, dancing skills, traditional dancing, from when she was small, little, and we coached them, and it was a fantastic outing. So I had been going to the US on visiting visa, B1, B2. Yeah. But for the first time, I went as a visiting scholar because of Igbo language. So just like you said, most people out there are not interested in your English because you can't give them
what they have.
What they have. They have abundance of it. You are still, whatever you do, you can only measure up to a certain level. But you have what they don't have, what they need. The world needs to share knowledge. You had asked why they were setting up Igbo departments
abroad.
Because people are curious. People want to learn new things. People are not happy staying in one place. They grow. That's why every day you go to the market and you spend more money to buy a new phone because somebody is making sure that new things are coming up. And some of those new things can come out of Africa, can come out of Nigeria, can come out of our languages, can come out of our gem concepts buried in our languages. So.
Oh, thank you so much. Just to round this up, there's this argument that I really would like your take on. The fact that some people say that ethnicity divides more than it unites. From the tensions that we've noticed, in fact, currently, and well, I say concurrently, like it's still on people are still having ethnic disputes. What would you say to that argument, especially since we're promoting, speak your language, speak your language? What would you say to that?
Well, let me ask you,
Yes.
if you don't mind.
I don't know.
Do we have, now that many more of us are speaking English rather than our languages, do we have less conflicts now than we had 50 years ago when most people spoke their languages? Do we?
Yes. We still have more conflicts.
We have more now.
Yeah, we have our conflicts. They're still here.
So I think you can see easily that it is not because we speak different languages that we have conflicts. It has nothing to do with that. In actual fact, on the contrary, the fact that we have become disoriented, the fact that a lot of us have lost that sense of identity of who we really are, that love and respect to our culture and language. And mark you, our languages and cultures have a lot of respect for life, for the sanctity of life, for the sanctity of blood, human blood. Spilling blood was taboo in our cultures, in our languages. We have lost the sense of those things. The respect for a corpse, the dread, the sanctity of corpses, it's no longer there. When we were small, seeing a corpse was like, it was like something out of the world.
Yeah.
It shook you and you never recovered from it for weeks and months. Even as an adult, perhaps you still have nightmares about them. But today, young children, it's a way of life. So what I'm saying is, it could be we are suffering for actually the consequences of having lost our languages. That's just a way of looking at it. But ordinarily, if you learn your languages and you have respect for yourself and for your language and culture, you are in a strong position to interact, to negotiate. If all of us are sound and strong in our languages, with self-confidence and awareness, when we meet, there's no complex. There's no inferiority complex. We can talk to ourselves as equals. We can have mutual respect and interaction. And we forge and move ahead. Switzerland is a country that has 4 or so languages. They had conflicts in the past, but they say, hey, we don't have to do that. Let us agree on how to organize ourselves. They have cantonments. So, okay, this is French speaking. This is German speaking. This is Flemish. And this is Dutch. And so on. So they rotate. The Flemish, by the way, had also gone into extinction almost. They worked hard and they revived it. Today, you can do university education entirely in Flemish. When you go to Belgium, they say, okay, so not Switzerland, Belgium. They say, okay, which language do you want to use? Switzerland is French and it's 2 languages. So that is the situation. If you go to Singapore,
She didn't totally agree. She had to.
Yes, I quite agree, but I just want him to land, then I'll bring up my question.
Sure. Singapore, they still have their Chinese, they have their Malay, and so on. They had issues. They have what they have done is to reach understanding, and that understanding is based on mutual respect. That's sense of identity. I know who I am, and I have respect for myself, for my language. You can't give what you don't have. If you don't have self-respect, you can't respect the other person adequately enough. So, but if you are solid, well-trained, your mother born you well, then you can meet some other person whose mother gave birth to him and trained him well. You can then negotiate, and there will be unity and progress.
I actually understand where you're coming from.
Yes,
but there's this fear. Yes, there's this fear that if Nigeria focuses on multilingualism instead of coming under one language. Now, for instance, I as an Ibera person,
like instead of coming under English, is that what you mean? Because if you mean another Nigerian language, then you say so that we know, because it brings its own complexities. So if you say that, do you mean that if Nigeria comes under English language.
No,
Hausa.
I don't mean English language. Any Nigerian language.
Go ahead.
Instead of having several languages,
Go ahead.
having this diversification.
Okay.
So the fear now is, for instance, I am Ibira, and Tina is her tribe, Frederick, yourself. The possibility that I'll be more loyal to my ethnic group rather than more loyal to Nigeria as a country is high.
If what happens?
If we are focusing on being a multilingual state.
Excuse me. You were ab initio a multilingual country. Before the British people came, the colonialists came, you were disparate, separate entities, but interacting. You had your conflicts, but you also had your interactions. Everywhere in the world, people had their conflicts. There was more conflict in Europe than you had in Africa at some point in time.
True.
So, if we are the way we are, and we were grouped into as a country, like I said, you respect yourself, I respect myself. We reach agreement on how to operate, and things work. What happens, what goes wrong is when you don't have agreement, when you don't discuss. And that's why people are talking about the constitution and restructuring and so on. That people are saying that the 1999 constitution was not developed by the people, but was imposed from top. And that we need to sit down, like the Independence Constitution. Do you know how many constitutional conferences that were held in Nigeria and in London to trash out that constitution? And that constitution had provisions for everybody. And that's why the national anthem said, though tribes and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. That's the concept.
Some of us did not get to know that.
Yeah,
So
that's the concept. So, it's yes, though it may differ, in brotherhood we stand. In brotherhood, based on mutual respect, based on the fact that you know where you are coming from, you are strong, you are solid, you can't change who you are. And it will be a grievous mistake to try to force people to change who they are. For you to stop being Ibira and become Hausa or become Nupe or a Gala or Igbo. No, that is when conflict. Please take notes. That's when conflict comes. That's when conflict comes. It is when you try to force somebody to abandon his identity, to assume your own. That's when there is who are you? That's when conflict comes. But if you respect people, encourage them, make them be happy with themselves, they are happy. And from the abundance of their happiness, they meet and share. And that's common ground.
So if I get what you're saying, even when we have several tribes, we still need to teach our children to be loyal, to have that spirit of brotherhood. I mean, we have issues. Yes, we have issues where because this person is not my tribe, I'm not giving him this job, even when he's qualified. I'm trying to come from that aspect.
That happens when there is no consensus, when there is no agreement, when there is no unanimity of purpose. Like we said, if we had a constitution that people came together. Remember, there were representatives from every major group, every group.
Yes.
The chiefs went, the people elected people, they went and said, this is what we are going to do. Unfortunately, we have a situation in which people say, no, I wasn't part of this. This doesn't represent me and my interest, and so on and so forth. So that is part of the problem. And we need to address that. We don't run away from problems. It will not go away. Yeah. Like I said, countries like, let us take what is now India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. They were one country when the British, colonized them and left them. On the brink of independence, Malaysia, I'm sorry, not Malaysia.
Pakistan?
Yeah, Malaysia. Yeah, not Malaysia now, Bangladesh. Bangladesh pulled out. All right? Then Pakistan and India split. So This one is predominantly Hindu. This one is predominantly Pakistani, and Islam, and so on. But even within them, they still have minority groups. And India still has more languages than Nigeria has. They are living together. They have their constitution. They respect their people in their different states. And people have to grow, even though Hindi is predominant. So you allow people that God-given right to develop their language, to speak their language, to learn in their language, of course, to learn other languages.
So
and that creates job. We are talking about job opportunities.
Yes.
Look, there's no language of Europe that doesn't have the full works of Shakespeare translated into them. So you can read Shakespeare in French if you want, in Dutch, in Spanish, and so on. Have they been translated into Bete or into Ibira?
Not at all.
Who will translate them? That's job. We say we have 3 million graduates who don't have jobs because we have not done the right thing. Train them, make them effective linguists and translators. Give them the skill, give them the money, the funding, and that's where the money is. They will translate them, all the important books already. That's one for religion. We seem to be very fast. There's hardly any language that doesn't have the Bible in the languages. But we're not doing that with other reading materials. So that will create jobs. Printing will grow. A lot of things will grow. Knowledge will grow. So we don't have to, we are limiting ourselves. God and nature have already expanded us and given us a broad base to grow. And we are maliciously limiting ourselves.
Thank you, sir. I really understand this passion.
Why are we doing that?
Thank you. I think mostly just to address your question as well, I feel like what you're saying more is some of all those issues are more in the character of people, and it's not the issue of the language or the culture of the people.
It's in the nature of the arrangements we have, and in the nature of the people that now exist because of the way they've been brought up, and because they have not been cultured enough within those their linguistic groups.
Okay, so this was an absolutely interesting conversation. We can go on all day about this particular topic, but it's very important. It only goes to show the importance of languages. It is your identity. Like he said, it's very free. It's free to learn. I mean, we have an app called Izesan Speak Esan. You can learn any African language on there. So you mentioned apps as well. You must not even you can go to an institution for more, but you can do that from the comfort of your home, where you're seated right now watching me with your devices. You can learn any language. There's no more excuse. You have no excuse. Like, do you have any excuse for not learning it? Are the teachers not there? Is a mobile
your free time. Nobody's telling you must do it at this time.
Yes, and then we're beginning to like have stories as well, on things like the app and even some books. You would see that they've been translated into the languages from English, and some can even be written like purely in the language. This is things that people are coming up with, and that is the essence of this language. And it's not just for nothing. There's actual value to it, economic value, national development, and thank you for everything that you've highlighted right here. I can't even ask you because, of course, you speak Igbo. Now, do you speak any other language?
Monso Yoruba dear.
This is not little.
Nkajao Sankada. I can greet you very well I can say Mesiereo, Abadie, and I can greet in a few languages, Wado, and so on. And I intend to do more of that.
If you're feeling like a kid Nigerian just now, see somebody that is more like you.
So
it's fine.
Just greetings alone.
Yes.
If you talk to somebody, you see a policeman on the road under the sun, stressed, angry, and perhaps salary has not been paid, the child has to go back to school, and is not very happy. And you just look at him and see the name, and you kind of greet him in his language.
Yes.
For most of them, something happens immediately. You just see a reaction, a little shift, and you might get a smile.
It happens everywhere.
Yeah. So it's very important. Multilingualism is very important. You should be able to, even just greetings alone. People are very happy when they know that you have been able to say a few words in their language.
There are even several instances, actually. For instance, let's say there was a time I was speaking with a cousin of mine in the market. Someone who is better as well was heard and instantly. And like that was how we all connected. Yeah. We bought from her. So there's just a lot of things tied when it comes to, speaking your language. Yeah. So thank you so much. And also thank you for likely, putting in that you can speak all those little languages. Even to be humble about it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing me here. You so look like somebody that wants to go back and learn a language right now.
No, somebody that wants to or that needs to.
Don't force me. I would.
Okay, don't force you.
No, I'm not forcing
Frederick, you didn't tell us, or tell me, what language were you born into?
Kwale.
Oh, Kwale. Kakime.
I don't speak Kwale. Okay. That's a really interesting thing.
You see that story
I understand
of
bits of it,
but
I don't speak
both
Kwale.
Parents were Kwale?
No.
Okay.
My mom is from Rivers.
Which group?
Bakana.
Bakana. Is that Ijo?
No, they're not Ijo. They're from Degema.
Okay.
So this is
so that was a bilingual kind of.
I want to say yes, but not necessarily. My upbringing is very different to most. So yeah.
Well, it's never too late to learn either your mother's or your father's language, or any other one of choice. You don't speak Hausa very well, or Yoruba, or Igbo.
Yoruba, I have a grasp of Yoruba because I lived most of my life in Lagos. So Yoruba is something I can follow in a conversation with Yoruba. So I wouldn't speak back to you, but I would understand what is being said.
Frederick has the app, so we can start monitoring your progress, if you want, every show, or can run a test for you.
Don't force him, Tina.
I'm not forcing him.
So tell me about this app. It's time for me to ask my own questions. Tell me about this app.
Okay.
I can't come here and talk, and then I go back to Aba and say, I met these wonderful people, and I sat down with them for an hour and a half or so.
I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, so I need to tell them what you are doing and how we can collaborate with you, because we are right now setting up our educational management software platform and our e-learning platform. And we are really very keen to become also a center of excellence for long-distance learning in Nigerian languages. Yes. That's one area we are desperate to leverage on. In fact, a year and a half ago, I got in touch with people in the US who are very keen to work with us to teach Nigerians various Nigerian languages. In fact, we developed all kinds of things. Then suddenly we realized we were not standing on any ground. We didn't have the infrastructure, these resources. So now we are developing them, and hopefully by the end of the year we should be able to begin to do things. So what you are doing is of great interest to me. We'll be happy to bring Anthony.
So let me just
and other people to Aba to come.
So sorry to interrupt. Right. Let me just tell you, Izesan Speak Asan shares the same sentiments as Ninlan, where we understand the current issue or the current struggle with Nigerian languages, not just Nigerian, but African languages. So it's an app, an African language learning app. You can get different languages on there. Currently, we have over 10 languages, and it's something that keeps getting updated. Now, you can learn in different ways. You can learn by the way you started in school, like with words. You can learn with sentences. You can learn with stories. We have original stories, not the other ones, stories that you've heard before, but original stories that you can only find on the app in different languages. So if you want to read, say, one particular story, like, Curious Simi. You can find Curious Simi in Swahili, in Igbo, in Yoruba, in Setswana, and so many languages. You can even learn with music, because one thing music is doing now is it has always been, there's always been the provision for languages in a certain language, music in a certain language. So you have music on the app as well to learn with. So there are just various tools and a curriculum that teaches you the culture, not just the language, because sometimes if you understand the origin of some words, I'm sure you can, attest to that in Igbo, the origin of some words would teach you more and help it stick to you. That's correct. So honestly, the app definitely will be looking into, collaborating, working with the government, because what we're doing, what the app is doing is helping, Ninland goals, if you must say.
Yeah, so today I'm visiting with you. Maybe next month or sometime soon, Anthony Kaiwe will visit with us and give a lecture, and then we begin to discuss how we can collaborate. Because honestly, Nigeria as a country must do more of what you are doing, and we must do more of what we were set up to do. Funds or no funds, we still have a lot we can do with creativity and with passion and commitment. So looking forward to more collaboration.
Okay, so as a visitor, we always like to send you off with something.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so this is just awesome. A take, just to remember us, just so you don't forget us once you, leave the shores.
After being tortured like this by the three of you, will I ever
don't say it that way. Don't say it that way.
So I won't forget you. So even if you didn't give me this, but this makes it special.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Of the culture.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you were here, you've been here, and this is
beautiful.
what shows that you were here.
Okay. Oh, and there's a beautiful face cap to go with it.
Yes.
Let me try it for size and change this one.
Definitely a fit.
Oh wow! You see that?
Yeah, that's good. So thank you very much.
So much.
I appreciate it.
Once again, we have the executive director of the National Institute for Nigerian Languages right here with us, Professor
Ninland for short.
Ninland for short. Correct. Professor Obiajulu Emejulu.
Thank you very much.
Stop looking at him like that.
They know what I was about to ask.
I know. Did I do well?
Fine. I'm not going to ask you, but thank you so much, sir, for joining us. This was a pleasure. I can't, emphasize it enough. Thank you so much.
We sure did learn a lot. We learned a lot. Thank you so much, sir.
Dalorine. Imela.
Woshi. Add my own.
Now go there, mungo there. Okay, your own is
Woshi.
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 Woshi. Okay, for all right.
Thank you. Okay. So, please, my beautiful people, can you sign off?
Hi, we're thankful for you guys joining us once again. It's me, your social prefect, Frederick.
Yeah, and it's me, Nefisat Ohnene Abdurrahman. Remember, teach your child or sibling your native language. It's very important. It's not just an identity, it's your pride.
Exactly. And it's never too late. Even if you're now an adult, you have no excuse. The app is there for you, Easy and Speak ASAN. Download the app and get to learn Nigerian languages. And please, feel free to try to be a polyglot. You can learn other languages as well, African languages as well on the app. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode. This is State of the Culture. If you don't already know, I'm your host, Angiatin Justina. Thank you and see you some other time.